Welcome in, folks. My name is Jeremy. I'm the MC today. We're taking a little bit of an early lunch. We got about 10 minutes before the hot shop team comes back in and gets back to work. But until that time, go ahead and have a seat. You think of any questions, raise your hand. I'll do my best to answer whatever you got. And if you have something targeted to the artists, when they come in, you want to know something about them, let me know. I'll ask them, and we'll get some answers for you. That being said, we'll give it another 5 or 10 minutes, let the hot shop team finish up lunch and come back, and hope to see you here. All right, folks, welcome in. Welcome to the hot shop here in Tacoma. Just getting back from lunch, and I'd like to take the opportunity to tell you about our visiting artist this week. We have in studio today Kartini Thomas. She's an American sculptor who lives and works on Oloron Island in France. Inspired by monsters, microbiology, and modular toys, Thomas sculpts playful landscapes populated by creatures that are at once charming and unsettling. Changes in scale, mischief, monstrosity, exploration, and unpredictability are important parts of this creative adventure. She was recently awarded the Homo Faber Fellowship as a Master Artisan, as well as the Young European Ceramicists Prize. Learn more about Kartini Thomas online at her Instagram page at kartini.thomas. And this Sunday, Kartini will be giving an artist talk from 1 to 2 here in the hot shop. Either join us online at the museumofglass.org or come in for that talk. A couple of events I'd like to make you aware of. This Friday, tomorrow, July 10th at 6 p.m., we'll be showing Bend It Like Beckham here in the hot shop. Stick around after the showing for a discussion with the Museum of Glass hot shop staff. Concessions will be available in the Museum Grand Hall. The doors open at 5:30 p.m. Saturday and Sunday, we have full fusing workshops in the Education Studio, and you can reserve your online workshop at the museumofglass.org under the Workshop tab or at the Visitor Services desk. All right, folks. This morning we did some trial and error work on a sculptural piece that Kartini has got in mind. She's sketched up. If we can actually get a picture of that put onto the main screen, we are working this afternoon on a caricature, if you will, of a sexy dumb Donald. This is a reference to a 1970s and 80s cartoon called Fat Albert. And Dumb Donald was one of the characters in the show. This morning we spent a good amount of time working, if you can see up there, number 2. Dumb Donald had a hat of sorts, and we spent a lot of time this morning working on refining our technique to get that hat done correctly. We've got one example of that put into this big silver box here on the left-hand side of the studio. That's called our garage. And we'll see how that all plays out as we get ready to put these items together and assemble our form. All right, on the right-hand side of the studio, we've got Gabe holding the door for Adam, who's now gone into that crucible. Our crucible holds 1,000 pounds of glass at 2,100 degrees, 24/7. We've got 2 of those crucibles here on the hot shop floor. So at any given time, we've got 1 ton of glass that we're able to capitalize on. Now, from time to time, when those pipes get really hot, uncomfortable to work with, we'll have to run them through a pipe cooler. So on the right-hand side, that's what is happening. Running that pipe through a pipe cooler makes it a lot easier to get our hands down close to the hot glass at the end of that rod. And ultimately, it makes it a lot easier to carry, 15, 20, 30 pounds worth of glass around the hot shop studio that much easier. All right, at the center bench, We're using a wooden tool called the block. Now that block is made out of a fruit wood, usually apple or cherry wood, so when it burns, it does burn very evenly. We soak those tools in water in the buckets behind our artist, and the reason we do that is when the moisture of that water gets really close to the hot glass, it creates a layer of steam on which our glass forms ride. Now that distance, that steam, provides that nice little cushion and allows us to have the outside or the skin of our objects super shiny and smooth, not leaving behind any tool marks or any unsightly chill marks in the surface. Now the large orange hole that Adam is standing in front of there, that is called a rewarming chamber, a G hole or a glory hole. Now you contrast that with the crucible. The glory hole runs at about 2,300 degrees, vice 2,100 for the crucible. And there is no hot glass inside that rewarming chamber. If we could see a diagram of the rewarming chamber, it was run on they run on natural gas and forced air. And they run for the duration of the time that we're here in the hot shop studio. We turn those off at the end of the day. Again, contrast that with our crucibles that have to run 24/7. We keep those things running to keep the crucible tub itself from cracking and then losing all of our glass. You notice that our artist is now using a pad. That pad is a pad of newspapers. It's folded 7 to 9 times and then soaked in water. In similar way to the block and the other wooden tools that we have in the bucket behind our artist bench, it provides that nice layer of steam in order for us to chill and shape our objects in a very particular way. And we notice that our artist has been sitting on that bubble or tending to that bubble for a good amount of time, letting the outside skin set up. That's a good indicator that what is going to happen next is we're going to go back into that crucible for another layer of hot glass. And the reason that we sit outside and let those bubbles harden up is so that when we go back in to get another layer of clear, the bubble itself does not collapse or distort under the heat or weight of all of that new glass. So again, when those pipes get hot, we run off to the pipe cooler, which is exactly what Gabe is doing there. And when he's happy with the temperature of that pipe, we'll get back here to the center bench, continue to shaping up our form. And folks, you'll notice that the glass that we've got there at the center bench, that is all clear. There's not been any color added to it. We'll be doing the color application here fairly shortly. The way that's going to happen is we have a kiln plate with a lot of colored stringers, similar to this one that I'm holding here, just a small glass rod. And they're aligned on this tray, or on this plate, in such a way that when the bubble that we've got here at the center bench is the right size, dimension, and temperature, we'll roll that across the plate, sticking those canes to the outside of this bubble, giving us some stripes. And then from there, we will use the friction of dragging the edge of that bubble form across the marvering table to add some twists into that. So you'll see that coming up here. Again, our artist here at the center bench is sitting and tending to that bubble, letting the outside skin set up, develop some structural rigidity. Another good indicator that we're going to go back into the crucible and add another layer of hot glass to the outside of this bubble. All right, as I said before, we let that bubble set up just a little bit, get some more structural integrity into it. And with that, we're back into the crucible for another layer of clear glass. And by turning that pipe vertically and hanging it over that bucket, Gabe is able to remove any excess clear that he doesn't want on there. It's called a strip gather. And because it is so hot to gather that new glass out of the crucible, you got to make sure that that pipe is nice and cool for when we get back to the center bench. Again, using that wooden tool called the block to shape up the outside skin of our form. And then we're going to measure the dimensions with that set of calipers, making sure that it is the right size to match up with the Steinert plate that we have currently in the garage getting warm. Here at the center bench, Gabe is using that pad of papers to really chill and set the outside dimensions of that bubble. And as he's finishing up there, he's discussing with Nick here at the garage. Get that Steinert plate out of the garage. Now, understand that those little glass canes on that plate are already at 1,000 degrees. You can't tell. But they're about 1,000 degrees, and they're going into that 2,300 degree rewarming chamber, getting them ready to attach to the outside of this bubble form. Remember, hot glass sticks to hot glass, so we've got to get these items as close to matching in temperature as we can in order to make the stick as successful as possible. All right, and with that, we get back into that rewarming chamber. Remember, those canes are only about 1,000 degrees, which is nice and hot, but it's not liquidy hot. It's not malleable. So back into 2,300 degrees, impart a little more thermal energy into our bubble form. Before we bring it out, we're going to roll it across that big steel table there, kind of force those canes into the surface of that bubble form. There we go. You can see him adding some twists by just dragging that hot glass across the surface of that marvering table. Now you notice that those canes do not come all the way to the tip or the apex of that bubble form. One of the next steps that we're going to do is get back to the center bench, and we're going to use our tools to create a constriction at the very end of that, bringing all of those canes together into a single point of convergence at the very top of the bubble form, and we'll cut away the excess, leaving that on the ground. So we get to see that here very soon. All right, folks, now you can really appreciate where the color canes stop on that bubble form. You see Gabe using that pad to really, really chill the outside of that bubble form and then to form the initial constriction. And now he's reached down and is using a steel tool or metal tool called the jacks to create that constriction. And with his diamond shears, I'm going to refine that, cut that end off, and then get it back into the rewarming chamber so that we can melt all of that crispity, crunchity glass that he just created with those shears. Back on the yoke and into that 2,300 degree rewarming chamber. So again, folks, really sitting here at this center bench, tending to that bubble, making sure that it's nice and strong. I'm going to add another layer of clear to the outside of that. Not only will that magnify the colors that are underneath the clear, but it will also serve to protect those glass canes from anything disturbing them. A quick run over to the pipe cooler. Make sure that the pipe is nice and cold before we add that layer of clear to the outside. All right, with that bubble nice and set, nice and strong, gonna go back into that crucible. Again, remember that crucible holds 1,000 pounds of glass, 2,100 degrees, and it runs 24/7. Gonna add another layer to the outside of this bubble form that we're working on. And again, getting back over to that pipe cooler. Even that short amount of exposure to the heat from that crucible heats up the pipe considerably. So we got to get it over there, cool it down, make it a lot easier to manipulate. And again, carrying around the Hot Shop Studio with our hands a little closer to that object makes it a heck of a lot easier than trying to do it from all the way down at the opposite end. Another larger version of the tool called the block. It scales with the amount of glass that we put onto the outside of our forms. So not everything that we use to shape our glass forms comes in the form of a tool. Right there, you saw our artist using the force of gravity to elongate that bubble, draw it out a little bit. And then back to chilling the outside skin of our form with that tool called the paper. Again, it's a newspaper folded over 7, 8, 9 times, soaked in paper. Excuse me, soaked in water. As beginning glass artists, one of the things that they teach you is that one of the most critical locations on your glass form is the connection between your artwork and the pipe. That connection is called the moil, and that moil needs to stay above 1,000 degrees or we risk cracking it and then losing all of our hard work. So from time to time, you'll notice our artist uses that big fluffy torch behind him. A big fluffy torch runs at about 2,800 degrees up to 4,000. And it's great for giving our glass forms an all over or very diffuse amount of heat. And then we got back into that rewarming chamber for another full heat on the entire skin of our form. Now the metal tool that Gabe is using here at the bench is called the jacks. And what he's doing is creating a constriction off the end of that blowpipe. That constriction is also known as the jack line. And that jack line will serve as the location that we will apply a little water to and break this bubble form away from this pipe when we get ready to attach it to another. And then a little bit of forced air to chill off that constriction, make it stop moving, let it set up a bit. And tend to this form just a little bit more before we get back into the rewarming chamber. And with the team moving out of the way, it really gives you a good appreciation of how much you can manipulate that glass using that pad of papers. Really, really targets specific areas of that form. With the artist happy with where we are on that shape, we get back into that rewarming chamber for another all-over diffuse heat to the skin of our object. Again, gravity and centrifugal force helping to elongate and draw out the crown of that form. And then setting the outside dimensions with the chill of that paper. Again, folks, you see the importance of paying attention to that moil, using that fluffy torch to keep that moil above 1,000 degrees so we don't lose our hard work. And then back into the rewarming chamber. All right, folks, so here on the left-hand side of the studio, we've got the team is actually heating up another piece that we created this morning. They took it from the big silver box called the garage. Now, the garage has an internal temperature on the right-hand side, or excuse me, my right, your left. The left-hand side of that garage is about 1,000 degrees, and the right-hand side is upwards of about 1,500 degrees. It's hot enough to get our glass forms up to temperature so that we can start working on them, but not so hot that they lose their shape inside. So now that we've gotten the hood form or the hat form out of the garage, we're bringing that up to a good working temperature. And in the next few minutes, you'll see both of those objects brought together here at the center bench. See what that entails. All right, so a little preemption of what's to come, a little premonition here. Going to bring these two objects together. You got to make sure that they're both within a reasonable facsimile of the same temperature. Hot glass will only stick to hot glass, so we got to make sure that they match and will get nice and sticky, nice and tacky. And then we'll mush those two things together. And then using a technique that involves some water, we'll add a couple of drops to the pipe on the right-hand side. And with a quick bonk of our tool, we will knock that away. We got a few minutes before that actually happens, though, so we'll stay tuned. All right, folks, for those of you who are just coming into the studio, we've got our artists here working on a wonderful little sculpture. Currently, we have two of our artists standing in front of these big orange holes. They are called rewarming chambers, or G-holes. Those G-holes are 2,300 degrees on the inside, and it runs for the time that we're here in the studio. If you compare that to the next machine to the right, it's a big silver tub. That's called a crucible. We have one on the left-hand side of the studio as well, and each of those crucibles holds 1,000 pounds of glass in a liquid state. So right around 2,100 degrees, and those run 24/7. Here we are back to using the fluffy torch, again about 4,000 degrees when it's running full out. And over on the left-hand side of the studio, we've got Nick heating up his form using same type of torch. If you remember, folks, that connection in between the blowpipe and the glass form that we're working on, that's called the moil, and it's super critical. If it drops below 1,000 degrees, it'll crack and we'll lose all of our artwork. So we'll use those big fluffy torches from time to time to give ourselves a little bit of heat, keep that moil above 1,000 degrees, and keep us in business. All right, folks, for those of you who are just joining us here in studio, we have as our visiting artist this week, Kartini Thomas. Kartini is an American sculptor who lives and works on Oloron Island in France. Inspired by monsters, microbiology, and modular toys, Thomas sculpts playful landscapes populated by creatures that are at once charming and unsettling. Changes in scale, mischief, monstrosity, exploration, and unpredictability are important parts of this creative adventure. She was recently awarded the Homo Faber Fellowship as a master artisan, as well as the Young European Ceramicists Prize. You can join us here in the Hot Shop on Sunday from 1 to 2 p.m. for the Artist Talk, or you can find out more about Kartini online at our Instagram page at kartini.thomas. All right, you notice Nick is reaching behind him for a couple of drops of water. Form some cracks in the surface of that glass, and with a tap, those cracks go all the way through. And Gabe is mounting up on top of that marver so we can do a stuff cup type application. Put the top of this hat form, if you will, on our sculpture, Sexy Dumb Donald. And with that join completed, we're going to get back into the rewarming chamber. Absolutely, yeah, great time for a round of applause, folks. Yeah. All right, now remember, the piece we just added is the coldest portion of the glass, so we've got to get it deep in that rewarming chamber, bring it up to working temperature so we can continue to refine that shape. Get rid of all of that excess, unsightly, crunchy glass at the very end of it where we just broke it away from that pipe. So we got to get it up to working temperature, and we'll bring it back to the bench and continue shaping. All right, gonna get that object deep into that G hole. Give it a nice overall heat to the skin. Bring that cold portion up to working temperature. And then backing it out just a little bit allows us to use the blowtorch type properties of that G hole to focus the thermal energy right towards the very end of it. All right, so our artist is now working outside the bench with a couple of paddles, making sure that the connection there between that hat form is nice and solid. All right, we notice that Gabe has now fired up a new torch. That new torch we call the hot torch because it runs at about 5,000 degrees, which is more than twice the temperature of either our rewarming station or the crucible where we keep our glass. We've now switched paddles to cork paddles. The cork allows us to manipulate that glass without leaving any unsightly chill marks or tooling in the surface. So he's really mashing those paddles together, ensuring that the connection between the piece we just added and the base form is nice and solidly stuck, so we don't have any mishaps when we put it away in our cooling oven for the night. Again, folks, you can see how important it is to keep our moil above 1,000 degrees. Nick's standing there with that fluffy torch, making sure that it doesn't crack. We'll get that back into the rewarming chamber for another all overheat. So the artist here at the center bench is currently heating up that furthest portion and pulling off the excess glass from the outside so we can have a nice refined finish when this object is actually completed. And then back to using those newspapers, cool off the surface of that bubble. And again, back to the big fluffy torch, making sure that our connection doesn't get below 1,000 degrees. You guys have any questions? Take the hot glass and roll it across the top. And when it rolls, it picks it up. Is that explaining? Good? Okay, what you got?
What's that wood thing that looks like lava?
The big glowing thing? There's actually nothing in there. It's empty. We use that to heat up our glass objects, but we don't keep any glass in there. I'm sorry? Yes. Yeah.
When they melt it, what does it do? Like, they melt it and it makes it hot. And
Yep.
it forms a sheet, but it doesn't really do anything.
And then when we're done with it, we put it into one of these big black boxes where it cools down overnight. Bye, guys. See you guys. Thanks for coming in. Always love those questions. All right, folks, back here to the center bench. Looks like more of the same. Doing the dance with the G hole and the bench back and forth. All right, folks, the question was, what are we making today, in essence? So if we can have our AV folks throw up a beautiful picture of sexy dumb Donald, which is what we're going for. You can see that is, that's what we're shooting for. So sexy dumb Donald. The dumb Donald portion is, it's a reference to a 1970s, a 1970s cartoon called Fat Albert. There was a character on the show called Dumb Donald, and he had a hat similar to what we see under the number 2 up there. All right, so we've now attached a punty rod onto the opposite end that we're attached to. Gonna make sure that connection is nice and solid, and then when he's ready, Gabe will reach behind him using the tongs, grab up some water drops and apply those water drops to the connection, or to the constriction rather, that he's firing up. Those water drops will create surface cracks, and then with a quick tap of his tool, the vibrations will make those surface cracks go all the way through that constriction, separating it from the blowpipe that it's on, leaving it on the solid pipe that Nick has got. So making sure that the moil is nice and hot so the water does its job properly. Here's your water. A little bit more. There we go. Now back into the rewarming chamber. Absolutely. Great time for a round of applause. Now, if you remember, folks, the first thing in and the last thing out are always the hottest portions of the glass. We basically flipped our object, and now that we've done that, the coldest portion is furthest away from our artist. So we're going to spend a lot of time going back and forth between the bench and the rewarming station, making sure that that cold end is up to temperature. We're working with the connection right now, making sure that the axis turns properly. And then we'll throw a little bit of extra thermal energy in there just for the sake of it. Right on the right-hand side of the studio, Adam's now creating a punting. He's going to make that so he can go into the garage here on the left side of the studio and start pulling out bits to be added to this sculptural form. Again, over to the pipe cooler, he's gone with that punty rod, making sure that it's nice and cool so we can not have to wear gloves. Allows us to get our hands a little closer to the end of that pipe. Makes carrying things around the hot shop studio a lot easier. So while we're here at the rewarming station, focusing the thermal energy right at the very end, Adam is here on the left-hand side of the studio working in the garage, moving pieces around, getting them put in the right order so that we can start pulling them out and adding those bits to our form. Really, really making sure that our form as it sits on that rod is as close to perfect as possible before we start adding bits. That's what we're doing here. Get the center bench, making sure that everything is as perfect as possible and that it meets our artist's vision. All right, so here at the center bench, while we continue to tend this form, over on the left-hand side of the studio, our artists have begun working on heating up the bits and getting them up to a good working temperature so we can add them to our form here. All right, folks, got to make sure that both of these glass items are as close to the same temperature as possible, knowing that hot glass will stick to hot glass. We're focusing the thermal energy down there on that left-hand side G-hole right at the very end of the bit. Make sure it's nice and hot so that when we stick these two pieces together, that join will be permanent. And it looks like we're getting pretty close here. Coming in from the left side, you got Gabe with one of those bits. And there's the attachment. You're gonna roll towards the hole and then they're gonna break it away so that any unsightly bits of glass don't fall directly onto our form. They fall on the floor instead. All right. And with the addition of that bit, we get it back into the G-hole for a nice all-over temperature. Bring it back up. And make sure that that moil doesn't drop below 1,000 degrees. And that moil, the connection between our pipe and our art form, is critical. We got to keep it above 1,000 degrees or it will crack and we'll lose all of our hard work. So our artists from time to time will get all the way deep into that G-hole, or they'll pull that fluffy torch out from behind the bench. Pay a little attention to that object. You contrast that with the hot torch that Gabe has just fired up. The hot torch runs at about 5,000 degrees. The fluffy torch runs about 1,000 degrees less than that, so around 4,000. There you guys see the application of that fluffy torch on the connection. That connection again is called the moil. And we've got to keep it above 1,000 degrees or we're going to lose all of our work. So as we make those trips back and forth from the rewarming station to the bench, over on the left-hand side, we're firing up another bit. Going to be adding that to the opposite side of the form that we just added this one to. We'll continue doing that for the rest of the afternoon until we run out of space. Another bit coming over, being presented. I'm going to attach it, and then we're going to roll it again towards the G-hole before we break off.
Take her home with her appetite. She'll lay your heart on.
Using those diamond shears to trim away a little bit of that excess glass on the bit that was just added. And here in the left-hand bench, we are getting another bit ready for application to the form. With that back into the rewarming chamber for another all-over heat. Remember that those rewarming chambers run at about 2,300 degrees for the time that we're here in the studio. You contrast that with our crucible. We have two of them on the floor. Each one holds 1,000 pounds of glass. So we have 1 ton of liquid glass being held at about 2,100 degrees, 24/7. All right, folks, it looks like we're getting ready to add another bit, a little dialogue between the left and center benches here. Another all-over flash heat for the form. And on the left-hand side, we've got that bit coming in hot with Gabe. And with that fourth application, we're back into the rewarming station. Remember, 2,300 degrees. Gives us a nice, good all-over heat to the skin of our form. On the left-hand side of the studio, we are going to continue to heat those bits up and prepare them. Bring them back to the center bench where we will continue adding them to the outside of our form. Remember that hot torch that Gabe is using runs at about 5,000 degrees, which is more than double. Is more than double the temperature of both our crucible and our rewarming station. right, so Gabe is using that 5,000 degree hot torch to really focus some energy right at the very ends of those bits. Doing so allows him to pull any of that excess glass to the very end and then snip it away. So we've got some additional pieces that will be added to the ends of these stalks as if they are flower forms, if you will. So we got to make sure that the end is trimmed and as free from excess glass as possible. That way makes that join a little bit better and a little more clean. Folks, for those of you who are just joining us, in studio today we have Kartini Thomas. She's an American sculptor who lives and works on Oran Island in France. She's inspired by monsters, microbiology, and modular toys. Thomas sculpts playful landscapes populated by creatures that are at once charming and unsettling. Changes in scale, mischief, monstrosity, exploration, and unpredictability are important parts of this creative adventure. She was recently awarded the Homo Faber Fellowship as a Master Artisan, as well as the Young European Ceramicists Prize. Learn more about Kartini Thomas online at her Instagram page at kartini.thomas. And if you're interested in hearing Kartini speak, we'll have the artist discussion this Sunday from 1 to 2 here in the Hot Shop. You can either join us in studio or you can join us online at themuseumofglass.org. So for those of you who are wondering what it is we are making today, if we can get our fine folks up in the AV department, throw up a picture of sexy dumb Donald. We can see exactly where we are in the build process. Can we get that picture put up, please? On the left hand side of the studio, Gabe is heating up the 8th of our bits that's going on. The outside of this form, our dumb Donald form. A little discussion between the left side and the center bench. And Gabe coming in hot with that 8th bit. I'm going to rotate that towards the door, away from the artist, so that when we break it off, if there are any little bits of glass, they don't fall onto the sculpture, they fall on the floor instead. And quick tap. Using the cork paddle to move and manipulate that arm without leaving behind any chill marks in the surface. And once the artist is happy with the position and the attachment of that bit, we'll get it back into the rewarming chamber for another overall heat. Currently, the artist is paying very close attention to the connection point between the blowpipe, or rather the punty rod, and our glass form. That connection point is called the moil, and the moil is critically important. It is in that if it drops below 1,000 degrees, we risk having it crack and then losing all of our work. So from time to time, we'll either use the rewarming chamber, go way deep inside there, or here at the bench, we'll use the fluffy torch to give us a little bit more heat in that area. On the left-hand side of the studio, we're heating up another bit, getting ready to add it to this form. You compare that fluffy torch that's being used here at the center bench with the hot torch that is being used on the left side. That hot torch runs at about 5,000 degrees. You compare that with the big fluffy torch at about 35 to 4,000. And then our rewarming chambers and our crucible operate in the 2,100 to 2,300 degree range. That crucible runs 24/7 and contains 1,000 pounds of glass. So between the two crucibles, we have a ton of molten glass here on the floor at any given time. and then back into the rewarming chamber. Again, no glass is kept in that rewarming chamber. It's nothing but fire brick, just a big oven. Gives us that all over nice diffuse heat to our forms that we're working on. And then once we have sufficient heat, we'll get back to the bench. Again, using that hot torch, we're going to pay close attention to the end of that bit we just added. And using the diamond shear, we're going to collect up all the excess glass at the end of it, and we're going to snip it away so that when we add the caps to the outside of these stalks, it'll join much more cleanly. Again, folks, you see how critical it is to keep that moil above 1,000 degrees. Kartini is sitting in the bench using that fluffy torch, spraying the moil with a good 4,000 degree heat. Keep it above that cracking temperature we talked about. And on the left-hand side, we've got Gabe going back into that rewarming chamber with our next bit to be added. And when he's happy with the temperature that both it and our form have, he'll run back over here to the center bench and attach that 9th bit to the outside of our form. Again, using that cork paddle allows our artists to manipulate the glass without leaving behind any tool marks or unsightly chill marks in the surface of that glass. Always happy with that positioning. We'll get it back into that rewarming chamber. Again, 2,300 degrees for a nice all-over heat to the skin of our form. And then back to the center bench where we'll continue to shape things up and bring in more bits to attach to the outside. Right, and another all-over diffuse heat for our form here at the center bench. On the left side, Gabe is heating up that bit, making sure that both of the temperatures are as close to as possible before he comes back here and presents it and attaches it again. Right, with that discussion there, folks, the left side of the house has taken some of these caps, mushroom caps, if you will, put them deep into that rewarming chamber, bringing them up to a good working temperature. Turn them here to the center bench. And using that 5,000 degree hot torch, we'll address the bottom of that. Nick will bring the main out of the rewarming chamber, and Gabe will then attach the cap to the end of the stalk here. All right, and with that, that is the first of many bits that will be added to these stalks. Here on the left-hand side, we've got Alex working in the garage, getting these pieces up to working temperature. Inside the garage, they sit at about 1,000 degrees, which is nice and hot, but is definitely not working temperature. So we've got to move them from there into the rewarming chamber, getting them nice and hot and tacky, so that we can then add them to the rest of our form. Again, you notice that Kartini is paying particularly close attention to the connection point between our punty rod and the glass form. Got to keep that punty and the moil, that glass piece, above 1,000 degrees, or else it'll crack and we'll lose all of our hard work. We've got Gabe using that hot torch, really focusing that energy into the end of one of those stalks. Meanwhile, Alex on the left-hand side of the studio is heating up the new bit to go on top of that. So Gabe has now told Alex to do one quick flash with that bit, get it into that rewarming chamber before he presents it here at the center bench. And with that quick flash, he drops off the cap to Gabe. I'm going to roll it over, pay attention to the bottom of that with the hot torch, and then nuke the corresponding post on our form and attach them, and then back into the rewarming chamber for another diffuse heat. Alex has returned to the center bench with that fourth bit. Again, with that 5,000 degree hot torch, pay very close attention to those stalks and to the caps. With a quick stick, make sure that our connection is good, and then we'll get it back into that rewarming chamber for another all-over heat to the skin of our form. Over on that left-hand side of the studio, Alex is continuing to work with those bits, getting into and out of that rewarming chamber, bringing them up to a good working temperature before he presents them back here at the center bench to Gabe. Again, Gabe is using that 5,000 degree hot torch, paying very close attention to the end of these stalks where the bits will be added, getting them up to a nice tacky, sticky working temperature. And get it back in for another all-over heat. Alex will do the same with his bit. And then we'll meet back here at the center bench in about 3 to 5 seconds to add that bit to the next stalk. All right, folks, that was the addition of our 6th bit. We got 2 more on this upper row. Again, and you'll see this dance, the same dance, over and over again, from the bench back to the rewarming chamber, back to the bench, as we continue to add these pieces to the form. Using that 5,000 degree torch on the bottom of that cap to bring it up to temperature, make it nice and tacky so that it sticks to that stalk. And when Gabe is happy with the position, we'll get it back into that rewarming chamber for another all overheat. All right, so on the right-hand side of the studio, we've noticed that Alex is getting his dancing clothes on, getting all of his protective equipment on, making sure that he's safe while he puts this away in our cooling oven for the evening. And we have 4 of those cooling ovens, one of them under each ramp, and then we have 2 top loaders here on the floor. Those cooling ovens sit with an internal temperature of about 1,000 degrees. It's where we put all of our projects throughout the day, and then when we leave in the evening, we push a button on the brain box on the side, and it brings that 1,000 degrees down to room temperature over a number of hours. All right, so we've got Gabe here in the center bench is now using those straight shears. Pay a little attention to the constriction or our jack line, getting ready to break that away. Scoring the surface of it and then applying the hot or the fluffy torch, giving it an all over heat. Bring the surface up to a good strong temperature. That way when we add our water droplets to that constriction, it will completely transect that, that little constriction point, leaving our glass form. In this particular case, Sexy Dumb Donald in Alex's hands, where he will then run to the annealer and put it away for the evening. All right, now that we've found all of our protective equipment, we can move forward, getting ready to box this item up, put it away for the evening. Gabe, what side are you going in? right, folks, with that, we have finished today's demonstration. Join us back in the hot shop tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. We'll resume.